The wind howled with a vengeance, hurling snow like frozen daggers against Jackson Harmon's face. The cold was a physical thing, a predator that cut through his wool coat as if it were paper. But the pain was nothing compared to the hollowness in his chest as he watched the wagon disappear. Another one gone. Eleanor, the pretty schoolteacher from Boston. She'd lasted exactly 4 days. That made 7. 7 women who had come to this mountain, taken one look at his life, and fled back to civilization without so much as a goodbye. A violent gust nearly knocked him off his feet. He knew standing in a Colorado blizzard was a fool's game. The storm was getting worse. He had to check the animals. The barn stood 30 yards away, a distance that felt like miles in this blinding, biting white. He pushed forward, head down, each step a battle. The snow was already past his knees. He reached the barn door just as a deep, rumbling sound vibrated through the very bones of the mountain. Jackson's blood went cold. He knew that sound. He'd heard it once before, 10 years ago, on the night that had taken everything from him. Avalanche, he whispered, the word swallowed by the wind. The horses inside sensed it, their panicked whinnies cutting through the storm's roar. Jackson threw open the barn door and rushed in. His 2 workhorses, Thunder and Dash, were rearing in their stalls, eyes rolling with terror. The rumbling grew louder. The whole barn trembled. He had to get them out, get them to higher ground. He managed to get a rope around Thunder's neck when the world exploded. The side of the barn caved in with a deafening crack. A tidal wave of snow, rock, and splintered wood burst through. The last thing Jackson saw were Thunder's terrified eyes. Then a universe of pain erupted in his head, and everything went black. Cold, unbearable, bone-deep cold brought him back. He was half buried in snow, pain radiating from every limb. The barn was gone, just broken beams sticking out of the snowdrifts like bleached bones. He tried to move, and a white-hot agony shot through his left leg. It was bent at an angle that wasn't natural, pinned beneath a fallen beam. Blood seeped through his trousers, staining the snow a deep, shocking crimson. He was going to die out here, the same way his family had. 10 years of borrowed time, and the mountain was finally coming to collect its debt. As the darkness closed in again, he thought he heard the jingle of harnesses, the crunch of wagon wheels. Hallucinations. The mind's last little comfort before the end. But then a voice cut through the fog. "Dear Lord! Jackson Harmon!" It sounded like Tobias Miller, the old supply wagon driver. Impossible. No one would be out in this storm. A weathered face appeared above him, half hidden by a snow-caked beard. "Hang on, son. I've got you." Jackson surrendered to the darkness, wondering if this time he might finally see his family again. Warmth. That was the first thing he felt. Warmth and the crackling of a fire. For a moment, he thought he was 10 years in the past. Sarah tending the hearth, the children playing on the floor. But then the pain shattered the illusion. "Welcome back to the land of the living," Tobias Miller said from a chair beside the bed. "How?" Jackson's voice was a dry rasp. "The good Lord guided me, I suppose," Tobias said, helping him drink some water. "Was heading back from the Patterson place when the storm hit. Figured your cabin was the closest shelter. Found you half dead in what was left of your barn." The memories flooded back. The avalanche. The horses. Tobias's face fell. Thunder didn't make it. Found him under a beam. Dash is all right, though. Spooked, but alive. Jackson nodded, another loss to add to the tally. "Your leg's broken for sure," Tobias continued. "Ribs, too, I reckon. But you're lucky to be alive, son. Another hour out there." The old man let the words hang in the air. Lucky. The word tasted like ash in Jackson's mouth. "Eleanor made it to town," Tobias said after a moment. "Passed her wagon on my way up." Jackson closed his eyes. He didn't care. She was just another ghost. "That makes 7, Tobias said quietly. 7 brides who couldn't hack it up here." He shook his head. "Maybe it's time to give up this fool's errand, son." Jackson stared at the ceiling. Maybe he was right. The mountain was no place for city women. I should have died with them, Jackson whispered, the words slipping out before he could stop them. But you didn't, Tobias said, his voice soft. The Lord spared you for a reason. Jackson had stopped believing in reasons a long time ago. As he drifted off to sleep, he didn't see the recent avalanche. He saw the one from 10 years ago. The wall of white that had buried his home, his life, his heart. He'd returned from checking his traps to find nothing. He had dug with his bare hands until they bled, screaming their names until his voice gave out. He found them himself. Sarah, holding Emma. William, halfway to the door. Only Jackson had survived. Only he was left to carry the weight of that survival. Spring came, and with it, a fragile kind of healing. Jackson's leg ached with the weather, a constant reminder of the day the mountain almost took him. He stood on the porch of his rebuilt cabin, the one he'd raised from the ashes of his old life, and stared at the lonely, breathtaking beauty of it all. At 35, he looked 10 years older, his face a roadmap of hardship, his hair streaked with premature gray. He went inside, knelt by the fireplace, and lifted a loose floorboard. Inside was a wooden box. On the lid, 2 names were carved, William and Emma. He opened it. Stacks of letters, one for every week since he'd buried them. Today's letter was for Emma. She would have been 16. He wrote about the first spring flowers, the return of the bluebirds. It was a madness, he knew, but it was the only thing that kept him sane. A knock at the door made him jump. He shoved the box back in its hiding place just as Tobias Miller stepped onto the porch. Afternoon, Jackson. Tobias. Wasn't expecting you. The old man shrugged. Paths cleared early. Brought you something. Jackson's eyes went to the wagon parked in the yard. He saw a figure sitting inside, his jaw set like stone. No more brides, Tobias, I'm done. Hear me out, son. This one's different. That's what you said about the last 3. Tobias looked uncomfortable. After that avalanche. I did something I maybe shouldn't have. I told her about your family, about the first avalanche. Cold anger surged through Jackson. You had no right. I know, but listen, she heard it all and she still wanted to come. Tobias stepped aside. At least talk to her. Jackson moved to the doorway, his eyes narrowing. The woman in the wagon wasn't like the others. She wore a simple, practical dress. She was sturdier, with strong shoulders that suggested a life of work, not leisure. As if she felt his gaze, she turned. Her eyes were direct, assessing. Not a young girl full of romantic notions. She looked to be 30, maybe older. Her name's Abigail Morgan, Tobias said quietly. Widow from Missouri. Knows what hard times look like. A widow. Jackson had specifically requested young, unmarried women. But Tobias was already walking back to his wagon, leaving Jackson in the doorway, staring at the woman who had just arrived to disrupt the solitary peace he had so carefully, so painfully constructed. She climbed down from the wagon herself, her movements sure and deliberate. She had a strong jaw, deep-set brown eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a practical bun. She wasn't beautiful, not in the way the others had been, but she was striking. She stopped a few feet from him, meeting his gaze without flinching. Mr. Harmon, I'm Abigail Morgan. He nodded stiffly. Mrs. Morgan. Mr. Miller told me about the tragedy that befell your family, she said, her voice low and steady. Her directness was a surprise. I understand the pain of loss. It leaves marks that never fade. Tobias had no right, Jackson said curtly. Perhaps not, but I'm glad he did. I prefer knowing what I'm walking into. She glanced past him at the cabin. May I come in? Reluctantly, he stepped aside. As she passed, he caught the scent of lavender and leather, not the cloying perfumes of the city brides. She took in the simple, sturdy interior he had built with his own hands. You built this yourself, she stated. It wasn't a question. Every log. It's good work. Solid. She ran a hand along the dining table. You know how to make things that last. The silence after Tobias left was heavy, uncomfortable. I should be clear, Jackson finally said. I didn't ask for another bride. I told him I was done. I gathered as much, she replied, no trace of offense in her voice. 7 women have come up this mountain. None lasted more than a week. I don't expect you'll be any different. She considered this. What made the others leave? The question was another surprise. The isolation, the cold, the work, he said. The fact that I'm not the man they thought they were getting. And what kind of man are you, Mr. Harmon? He stared at her. A man who's learned to live alone. A man who's done trying to convince city women they can be happy here. Fair enough, she said. She picked up her bag. I assume I'll be sleeping behind that curtain. For as long as you stay, yes. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Jackson felt like an intruder in his own home. He stepped outside, needing air. The mountains were painted in shades of purple and gold. This view had been his only companion for 10 years. Now a stranger was in his home. A widow with assessing eyes and a past of her own. It wouldn't last. It never did. But something about Abigail Morgan made him think she might leave a deeper mark than the others before she, too, inevitably departed. The first week passed in a strange, quiet truce. Jackson went about his routines, rising before dawn, tending his traps, wrestling a life from the unforgiving land. He waited for the complaints to start, for the tears, for the inevitable announcement that she couldn't bear it another day. But Abigail was silent. More than silent, she was capable. By the 3rd day, she had reorganized his pantry. She mended shirts he'd ignored for months. She baked bread that filled the cabin with an aroma he'd long forgotten. She asked practical questions, not nervous ones. She wanted to know how the rainwater system worked, where the winter stores were kept. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was both impressive and unsettling. On the 5th day, he came back from his trap lines to find her in the yard, splitting wood with his smaller axe. The sight stopped him dead. None of the others had even touched the axe. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow. "Splitting kindling. It starts the morning fire better." "That's men's work." She raised an eyebrow. "Is it?" The axe doesn't seem to know. He frowned, irritated by her logic. "You'll hurt yourself." "I've been splitting wood since I was 12, Mr. Harmon. My father believed in practical education." She swung the axe with practiced precision, cleaving a log neatly in 2. He had no answer for that. "Suit yourself," he muttered, walking past her. "Don't expect me to nurse you when your back gives out." "I wouldn't dream of it," she replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. Inside, he dropped 2 rabbits on the table. When she came in, she nodded at them. "Good catch. I'll prepare them." "I can do it," he said automatically. "I'm sure you can," she replied, rolling up her sleeves to reveal strong, scarred forearms. "But so can I. And you've been out since dawn. Rest." Before he could argue, she had his skinning knife in hand and was at the wash basin, working with an easy confidence that left him speechless. He sat by the fire with a book, but he watched her. There was an economy to her movements, a skill that spoke of a lifetime of such tasks. "Your husband taught you that?" he found himself asking. She glanced up, a strange flicker in her eyes. "No, my father. My husband was a city man, a clerk. He had soft hands. Never killed anything bigger than a spider." There was a wistful note in her voice. "You loved him." It was a statement, not a question. "I did. We had 3 years before the consumption took him." She fell silent for a moment, her hands never stopping. "And you? You loved your wife very much, I imagine." Jackson stiffened. "Tobias told you. Only that you lost her, nothing more." Her gaze was direct, unwavering. "It seems right to know something of each other's past." "You might change your mind by morning, like all the others," he challenged. "I might," she acknowledged. "But we're here now." He looked away, uncomfortable. It was so much easier to keep his distance when they were complaining, demanding things. Her calm competence gave him nothing to push against. "Yes," he said, the admission like pulling a splinter. I loved Sarah from the moment I met her. She followed me up this mountain without a second thought. She must have been a remarkable woman. She was. The tightness in his throat was suffocating. So were my children. William was 9, smart as a whip. And Emma, his voice caught. Emma was 6, fearless. He hadn't said their names aloud to anyone in years. The sound of them filled the cabin, heavy with a decade of silence. "Thank you for telling me about them," she said softly. That night they ate rabbit stew in a new kind of silence. Not tense, but aware. After dinner, she spoke from behind the curtain that separated their sleeping areas. "My friends call me Abigail." He stared into the fire. "I'm not much for friends these days." He heard her pause. "Fair enough. Good night, then." As he settled into his bedroll by the fire, the quiet rustle of her moving behind the curtain was a sound he hadn't heard in 10 years. It was a strange comfort. It wouldn't last. He knew that. He would rebuild the walls she had so effortlessly slipped past. But as sleep finally came, his last thought was of the rabbit stew and how it had tasted more like home than anything he'd eaten in a decade. He woke before dawn to the sound of movement. He lay still, listening. Abigail was already up, moving quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, stoking the fire, putting the kettle on. He'd always been the first one up. The other brides had complained bitterly about his early hours. "You're up early," he said, sitting up. She didn't startle. "Good morning, Mr. Harmon. I thought you might like coffee before you check your traps." She had already observed his routine, anticipated his needs. It was unsettling. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," she said, placing a steaming cup on the table. "I wanted to." He took the coffee, eyeing her with a new curiosity. "Did you always rise this early in the city?" A shadow crossed her face. "My husband's illness required constant care. The habit stuck." She poured a cup for herself. "Besides, there's something holy about the moments before dawn, like the world is holding its breath." The poetic observation reminded him so much of Sarah that he had to push the thought away. "I'll be back midday," he said brusquely. "Don't wander far. It's easy to get lost." "I'll be careful," she promised. "I thought I might gather some of those wild herbs I found. They'll dry nicely for winter." Again, that practical foresight, thinking of winter when spring had barely arrived. "Stay within sight of the cabin smoke," he advised, "and watch for bears." "I'll bring your rifle," she said, nodding to the Winchester above the door. He couldn't hide his surprise. "You know how to shoot?" She gave him a level look. "My father believed a woman alone was vulnerable. He taught me as soon as I could lift a rifle. I won the county fair shooting contest 3 years running." She handed him a bundle wrapped in cloth. "I packed some bread and jerky for you." He took it with a nod, momentarily speechless. As he walked through the pre-dawn chill, he couldn't stop thinking about her. She wasn't like the others. She didn't complain, she didn't demand, she simply contributed. He was used to the pattern of disappointment. The initial enthusiasm of the city women, followed by tears and then departure. He knew how to armor himself against that. But Abigail's quiet competence gave him no familiar ground. She seemed neither enchanted nor dismayed by mountain life. She was just practical. "It doesn't matter," he told himself as he checked a trap line. "She'll leave. They all do." But as the sun rose, painting the forest in dappled gold, he couldn't quite convince himself. For the first time in 10 years, the future felt unpredictable, and in a small corner of his heart, a corner he refused to examine too closely, that felt strangely like hope. He returned at midday to find her on her knees, digging in a patch of ground near the porch. "What are you doing now?" he asked, setting down his catch. "Starting a vegetable garden," she replied, a smudge of dirt on her forehead. "The soil here is decent." "Waste of time," he said. "Growing season's too short." "Not for hardy varieties. Potatoes, carrots, turnips. I brought seeds." The casual "we" she used as if she planned to be here for the harvest, grated on him. Suit yourself. You've tried before, she stated. Sarah did, he admitted, the name still feeling strange. Had mixed success. I'd appreciate any advice she might have had, Abigail said carefully. The request, reasonable as it was, sparked an irrational anger. How dare she ask about Sarah's garden, as if she could just step into his dead wife's life? I don't remember, he said curtly, turning his back on her. It was a long time ago. Inside, he cleaned the day's game with more force than necessary. Abigail came in a few minutes later. She didn't mention his outburst. They worked in silence, the tension thick between them. I found your journal, she said finally, her voice neutral. He froze, the knife in his hand feeling suddenly heavy. You went through my things. His voice was dangerously quiet. No, she said, turning to face him. It was on the shelf above the wash basin, open to a page about planting cycles. I assumed it was meant to be read. Relief washed over him, followed by embarrassment. She'd found his almanac, not the hidden letters to his children. That's not a journal, it's an almanac, records of weather, animal migrations. He wiped his hands. I keep track of patterns. Sensible, she said. If there are areas of the cabin that are private, I'd appreciate knowing. I have no wish to overstep. Her consideration shamed him. Behind the curtain is your space. The main room is shared. As they ate, he found himself saying, the garden will need fertilizer. There's a compost heap behind the barn. Surprise and pleasure flickered across her face. Thank you. After a moment, she asked, the ridge to the east. I noticed 4 crosses there. His chest tightened. Yes. He expected more questions, but she just nodded. It's a beautiful spot, peaceful. It was Sarah's favorite view, he heard himself say. She used to take her mending up there for hours. That afternoon, as he checked his eastern trapline, he felt the walls around his heart begin to crack. Abigail was coaxing him into sharing memories he had locked away for a decade. It was dangerous. Attachment only led to pain. But as he made his way home at dusk, the cabin lights glowing welcomingly through the trees, he couldn't silence the traitorous whisper in his heart that wondered, what if this one stays? 2 weeks passed. Abigail showed no signs of leaving. She had settled into the rhythm of the mountain as if she were born to it. The garden expanded. The pantry was meticulously organized. His clothes were mended with stitches so fine they were nearly invisible. He found himself lingering over meals, the silence between them growing comfortable, companionable. On the evening of the 14th day, she looked up from her sewing. Mr. Harmon, I've been here 2 weeks now, and you haven't mentioned the wedding. The question blindsided him. With the others, it had never come up. None of them had stayed long enough. The circuit preacher comes through every 6 weeks or so, he said finally. If you're still here when he arrives, we can make it official then. If I'm still here, she repeated, her expression unreadable. You're still waiting for me to leave, aren't you? 7 women have come and gone, Mrs. Morgan. Not one kept her promise. I am not them. No, he admitted. You're not, but that doesn't mean you'll stay. Why did you keep trying? She asked quietly. After so many left, why seek another bride? He didn't have an answer. Stubbornness, maybe, or foolishness. Or hope, she suggested. Perhaps a part of you still believes you don't have to be alone. Her insight was too sharp, too close to the truth. Being alone is safer. Safer than what? Than caring about someone who will inevitably leave, he snapped, the words harsher than he intended. She nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed a suspicion. I understand that fear. When my husband died, I swore I would never be so vulnerable again. But living in fear of loss, Mr. Harmon, is its own kind of prison. Her words hit him like a physical blow. He stood abruptly, needing to escape the truth of them. As she disappeared behind her curtain, he remained by the fire, her words echoing in his mind. A prison. Wasn't that exactly what he had built for himself over the last 10 years? He went to the window, staring out at the vast, indifferent beauty of the night. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine sharing this life, truly sharing it. It was a dangerous thought. Hope was the cruelest emotion of all. His gaze fell on the bearskin rug. On impulse, he moved it, pried up the loose floorboard, and pulled out the wooden box. William and Emma. He opened it, the scent of old paper and dried ink rising to meet him. He pulled out the last letter he had written, just days before Abigail's arrival. My dearest Emma, another bride left yesterday, the 7th. I don't blame her. This life is hard, and I am not an easy man. Perhaps it's better this way. Perhaps some men are meant to be alone. He refolded the letter, his vision blurring. What would Sarah think of the bitter, closed-off man he had become? He put the box away. His decision was made. Tomorrow he would take Abigail to the ridge. He would show her the crosses. He would tell her the stories he had locked away for a decade. It wasn't about letting her in. He wasn't ready for that. But Sarah and the children deserved to be more than just shadows in a lonely man's memory. They deserved to have their names spoken aloud. It was a crack in the wall, not a demolition. But as he returned the box to its hiding place, he felt a loosening of the tight bands around his heart. She might still leave. But for the first time in 10 years, Jackson found himself hoping, just a little, that she might stay. The next morning dawned bright and clear. He found Abigail already in her garden, kneeling in the dark, rich soil. I thought we might walk up to the ridge today, he said, the words coming out more abruptly than he'd intended. Surprise flickered across her face, followed by a careful neutrality. I'd like that. They climbed in a comfortable silence. The trail was steep, but she kept pace with him easily, her breathing even and controlled. Near the top, his heart began to race, and not from the climb. The trail opened onto a small clearing. The view was breathtaking, peaks stretching to the horizon. And there, beneath an ancient pine, stood 4 simple wooden crosses. He knelt before them, running his fingers over the names he had carved so long ago. Sarah, William, Emma, his parents. I come up here once a week, he said, not turning around. Talk to them. Stupid, maybe. Not stupid, she said from behind him. The conversation doesn't end just because they're gone. He rose and turned to face her, and the words poured out of him. He told her about William, who could set a snare better than most men. He told her about Emma, with Sarah's eyes and a fearless heart. He told her about his parents, who had followed him to this mountain, believing in his dream. He told her about the night, the sound like deep thunder, the return to find nothing but a sea of white. I dug with my bare hands until they bled, he said, his voice hollow. I found them myself. Sarah had Emma in her arms, protecting her to the last. He swallowed hard. I should have been there, died with them. For whom would that have been better? She asked gently. Would Sarah have wanted you to die? He had never thought of it that way. No, she would have wanted me to live. But not like this, not alone and bitter. Abigail nodded, her gaze on the crosses. Grief changes us. The trick is not letting it hollow us out completely. She paused. My husband's name was Robert. I nursed him to the end. The night he died, I was asleep in the chair beside his bed. I'd missed his final moments. Her voice was steady, but he could see the pain in her eyes. I blamed myself for years. It wasn't your fault, he said automatically. She gave him a sad smile. Just as the avalanche wasn't yours, but we carry the guilt anyway, don't we? They stood in silence, 2 souls shaped by loss. After a while she knelt and cleared the pine needles from the bases of the crosses. She placed a small bunch of wildflowers she had gathered before Sarah's marker. She would have liked you, he said, surprising himself. Sarah. She valued practicality and honesty. As they walked back down, she asked, Why now? Why show me this place? I'm not sure, he admitted. Maybe because something you said last night made sense, that living in fear of loss is its own kind of prison. "It is," she said quietly. "Is that why you came here? To escape that prison?" A shadow crossed her face. "Partly. I came for a fresh start, a place where no one knew my history." There was more to her story, he sensed, but he didn't press. As the cabin came into view, he felt a strange lightness. The burden of memory was still there, but sharing it had made it easier to carry. For today, someone else knew the names carved on his heart. The next morning, rain drummed on the roof. It was a good day for indoor tasks. He was repairing traps at the table while she sat mending by the window. "Mr. Harmon," she said, not looking up, "how long have you been keeping the journal beneath the floorboards?" His hands froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. "What are you talking about?" She looked up then, her expression calm. "I wasn't prying. I noticed the loose board when I was sweeping yesterday. It moved when I stepped on it." Anger flared, hot and defensive. "You had no right to look." "I didn't," she replied steadily. "I respect your privacy. That's why I'm asking openly." Her reasonable tone deflated his anger. "How did you know it was a journal? I've seen how you sit by that spot in the evenings, the care you take. It seemed like something private, sacred." He stared at her, caught between denial and the urge to tell her the truth. The truth won. "They're letters," he said, "to William and Emma. I've been writing to them since it happened." He looked away, bracing for pity or judgment. "Not foolish at all," she said quietly. "We keep talking to those we've lost, in whatever way brings us comfort." "You didn't look?" he asked, still disbelieving. "No, I would not violate that trust." Trust. The word hung between them. He realized in that moment that she had earned his. "Thank you," he said gruffly. She simply nodded and returned to her mending, but they both knew a fundamental shift had occurred. By afternoon, the rain lessened. "I should check the animals," he said. "The lower pen might have flooded. I'll come with you." Together they went out into the fresh, clean world. The pen was a muddy quagmire. "I'll dig a drainage trench," he said. "You fetch fresh straw from the barn." As she turned toward the barn, a flicker of movement on the trail caught his eye. A lone rider, making his way slowly up the muddy path. Visitors were rare. Tobias wasn't due for another week. "What is it?" Abigail asked, noticing his tension. "Rider coming," he said, already moving toward the cabin for his rifle. "Stay here." As the man drew closer, Jackson saw he was a trapper, maybe in his 40s, with a weather-beaten face. There was something vaguely familiar about him. The man reined in his horse. "Afternoon. Got caught in the storm. Looking for shelter." "There's a settlement down the valley," Jackson said, his rifle held ready. The man shook his head. "Trails are washed out. Name's Caleb Wheeler." He studied Jackson's face. "Don't you remember me, Harmon? We met at the trading post a few winters back." The name triggered a faint memory. "What brings you to this side of the mountain?" "Game's been scarce up north." Wheeler's gaze shifted to Abigail, who stood slightly behind Jackson. And then it happened. The man's eyes widened. He froze, just for a second, a look of pure, unadulterated shock, or was it fear? Flashing across his face before he masked it with a polite nod. "Ma'am, something was wrong. Very wrong." "You can stay in the barn," Jackson said curtly, "but you leave at first light." As Wheeler led his horse toward the corral, Jackson saw the man cast another look at Abigail. It wasn't admiration. It was recognition. "He knows you," Jackson said, turning to her. Alarm flickered in her eyes before she smoothed her expression. "I've never seen him before in my life. He was probably just surprised to see a woman up here." It was a plausible lie, but Jackson knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that it was a lie. Abigail Morgan had a secret, and it had just ridden up his mountain on a tired horse. Jackson led Wheeler to the barn, his mind racing. The trapper was too talkative, too eager to make small talk. He mentioned hearing about the Harmon tragedy down in the settlement, a fact that made Jackson's jaw tighten. But it was his comment about Abigail that put Jackson on high alert. "Your wife seems a fine woman," Wheeler had said. "You're lucky." The words were innocent enough, but the look in the trapper's eyes was anything but. Back at the cabin, the tension was a physical presence. Abigail moved about preparing dinner, her movements just a little too brisk, her back held just a little too straight. "Something's wrong," she said, finally breaking the silence. "That man, he knows about my past. He looked at you as if he'd seen a ghost." "Jackson," she began, using his first name for the first time, her voice low and urgent. "Is there something you're not telling me?" She looked away. "We all have parts of our past we prefer not to discuss. You, of all people, should understand that." It was a skillful deflection, but it was also a confession. There was a secret. A big one. He decided to take the stew out to their guest himself. In the lantern-lit loft, he confronted the trapper. "You seemed to recognize her earlier." Wheeler was evasive at first, claiming he was just admiring her beauty. Jackson pressed him. "Do you know her from somewhere?" The trapper sighed, the friendly facade dropping away. "Look, Harmon, I don't want to cause trouble. Whatever you've got going on with that lady is your business." "That's not an answer." "No, it isn't," Wheeler said, his eyes suddenly serious. "And maybe that's for the best. Some things are better learned directly. Ask her yourself. But be careful. That woman is not who she says she is." The cryptic warning sent a chill down Jackson's spine. He returned to the cabin, his mind a whirlwind of suspicion and doubt. "What did he say to you?" Abigail asked, her eyes wide with anxiety. "He said you're not who you say you are." Her face paled. "Jackson, whatever he might say, please remember, people are complex. We all have stories." "What is your story, Abigail?" he demanded. Before she could answer, a sudden violent gust of wind rattled the cabin, followed by a loud crash from the barn. They rushed outside into the storm. A section of the barn roof had collapsed. Inside, the animals were panicked. Wheeler was already there, trying to calm the horses. The three of them worked together in the driving rain, their earlier tensions forgotten in the face of the immediate crisis. They braced the weakened roof with spare timbers, their movements efficient and synchronized. In that moment, they weren't a grieving widower, a mysterious bride, and a suspicious trapper. They were a team. "Seems you found a good partner there, Harmon," Wheeler observed, breathing hard. "Not many women would wade into a situation like this without complaint." Jackson looked at Abigail, soaked and muddy, her hair plastered to her face, and felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in a decade: pride, and a fierce, undeniable protectiveness. Later, back in the warmth of the cabin, the three of them sat by the fire, a temporary truce declared. As the hour grew late, Wheeler returned to the barn. "Jackson," Abigail said, her voice barely a whisper, "there's something I have to tell you." A frantic pounding on the door made them both jump. It was Wheeler, his face grim. "Riders," he said, breathing hard. "3 of them, armed, and they're moving fast." Jackson's blood ran cold. "Abigail," he said, his voice low, "are these men looking for you?" She met his gaze, all the fight gone from her eyes, replaced by a weary resignation. "It's possible," she whispered, "if it's who I think it is." From the trail, they heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Time had run out. "Bar the door," Jackson told her, grabbing his rifle. He turned to leave, but she caught his arm. "Jackson, I never meant for trouble to follow me here." He looked into her pained eyes and knew, whatever she had done, he couldn't abandon her. "We'll talk when this is over." He stepped out into the night, a strange calm settling over him. For the first time in 10 years, he was fighting for something more than just survival. He and Wheeler took positions behind a large boulder at the edge of the clearing. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, rough-looking men armed to the teeth. "That's the Mercer gang," Wheeler breathed. "Bounty hunters, bad news." The leader, a big man with a thick black beard, held up a lantern. "Harmon, we know you're out there. We're looking for a fugitive." "What's your business on my land?" Jackson called back. "The woman calling herself Abigail Morgan," Mercer shouted. "She's wanted for murder. Killed her husband in Missouri, stabbed him in his sleep, and fled with his money. There's a $500 reward for her capture, dead or alive." The words hit Jackson like a physical blow. Murder. It couldn't be true, but it would explain so much. Her desperation to hide, Wheeler's recognition, her evasiveness. "You're harboring a killer, Harmon," Mercer yelled. "That makes you an accessory. You really want to die for a woman who's been lying to you from the start?" Jackson glanced at Wheeler. "Did you lead them here?" "No," the trapper whispered. "But I recognized her. The Morgan case was in all the papers." The bounty hunters urged their horses forward, advancing on the cabin. Time was up. Whatever the truth, Jackson couldn't let them take her. Not like this. "Wheeler," he said urgently, "will you stand with me?" The trapper hesitated for a long moment, then nodded once. "Your mountain, your rules." Jackson rose from behind the boulder, his rifle trained on the riders. "That's far enough, Mercer. This is private property." A tense standoff ensued. Jackson knew they were outgunned, but he stood his ground. Finally, Mercer spat on the ground. "Fine. We'll camp by the creek. But come morning, we're coming for her, with or without your cooperation. And Harmon, you might want to ask your bride what really happened to Robert Morgan. Might save you from making a bigger mistake." After they retreated, Jackson and Wheeler returned to the cabin. Abigail stood by the fire, the shotgun gripped in her hands. Her face was pale but composed. "They say you murdered your husband," Jackson said, the words heavy in the silent room. She didn't flinch. "I knew this day would come." She sat down, her dignity a shield against the chaos that had descended upon them. "My name is Abigail Morgan. I was married to Robert Morgan. That much is true." She took a deep breath. "The rest is complicated." "Did you kill him?" Jackson asked, the question hanging between them like a death sentence. She looked down at her hands. "Yes," she whispered. "I killed him. But it was not murder." She looked up then, her eyes pleading for him to understand. "Robert wasn't the man I married. In public, he was charming, respected. In private, he had a temper." "He beat you," Jackson stated flatly. "Yes," she said, the single word carrying the weight of years of pain. "I tried to leave once. He found me. And I lost the child I was carrying. The night he died, he came home drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. The beating was bad. When he finally passed out, I knew if I stayed, he would kill me eventually. So I took his knife, and I made sure he would never hurt me again." The cabin was silent, save for the crackling fire. Jackson looked at her, at the raw pain and quiet strength in her face, and he believed her. "You acted in self-defense." "The courts wouldn't have seen it that way," Wheeler interjected from the doorway. "A respected merchant found stabbed in his sleep, his money missing. They would have called it murder for profit, so I ran. And you ended up here," Jackson finished. "A mail-order bride on a remote mountain, the perfect hiding place." "I never meant to bring trouble to your door," she said softly. "I haven't lied about anything else. Only the circumstances of Robert's death." "If they take you back, what happens?" Jackson asked. "Hanging," Wheeler said bluntly. "Missouri doesn't take kindly to wives killing husbands." Jackson looked at Abigail, at the survivor who had fought back, who had fled across a continent seeking safety, only to be hunted down, and he made a decision. "We have until morning," Jackson said. He turned to Wheeler. "Where do you stand?" The trapper looked at Abigail with a newfound respect. "I've seen enough men like Morgan in my time. I won't help them take you, but I won't die for you either." "Fair enough," Jackson said. He knew they couldn't hold off 3 armed men for long. Fleeing into the mountains was a death sentence. They needed another plan. There might be another way, Wheeler said, a slow smile spreading across his weathered face. Mercer is here for the money, not justice. What if he believed that taking Abigail would get him killed before he could collect his reward? Make him think he's outnumbered? Jackson asked, understanding dawning. Exactly, Wheeler confirmed. By morning, Mercer will believe the whole settlement is up here, ready to fight for you. It was a desperate bluff, but it was their only chance. Wheeler left with extra coats and hats, planning to create the illusion of a small army in the woods surrounding the bounty hunter's camp. Jackson and Abigail were left alone in the quiet cabin. You should have told me, he said, not with anger, but with a deep sadness. I know, she whispered. But how do you begin that conversation? Good morning, by the way. I killed my first husband. He found himself appreciating her dark humor, her resilience. I believed I was safe here, she continued, that I could start again, build something real. The unspoken words hung between them. I spent 10 years hiding from my own ghosts, he said quietly, believing I didn't deserve another chance. But surviving isn't something to feel guilty about. It's what we do with the life we've been given that matters. You survived, Abigail. You did what you had to do. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. Thank you for believing me. I believe what I've seen, he said. A woman of strength and dignity. A woman who has brought light back into a home that had been dark for far too long. Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know this. You have a place here, as a partner, as someone who belongs. He reached for her hand, and in that simple touch, a future was forged. They sat in silence, the fire burning low, knowing that whatever came with the dawn, they would face it together. Dawn broke clear and cold. Wheeler had returned, his mission a success. Mercer's spooked, he reported. Heard him arguing with his men about whether the reward is worth facing an armed mob. Soon the sound of approaching horses broke the morning stillness. Mercer and his men rode into the clearing, their movements cautious, their eyes scanning the trees for the phantom defenders. Morning, Harmon, Mercer called. Seems your mountain's more populated than reports suggested. People look after their own up here, Jackson replied evenly. I'm a practical man, Mercer said. I don't fancy getting shot over a bounty. Perhaps we can reach an arrangement. He wanted confirmation that Abigail was there, enough to claim part of the reward without a fight. It was a trap, a temporary reprieve. Before Jackson could refuse, the cabin door opened. Abigail stepped onto the porch, her posture radiating a calm dignity. I believe I'm the one you're looking for, Mr. Mercer. Abigail, no, Jackson said, but she placed a calming hand on his arm. It's all right, Jackson. She faced the bounty hunter. Yes, I am Abigail Morgan. I killed my husband and I fled. The question is, what happens next? That depends on how reasonable you're prepared to be, Mercer said, intrigued. I think we can be very reasonable, she replied, a calculating note in her voice. You want your reward. I want to live. Perhaps there's a middle path. What are you proposing? Information for information. You tell me who sent you, and I'll give you something worth far more than the $500 on my head. A cunning light entered Mercer's eyes. And what might that be? Robert's real money, she said, her voice ringing with confidence. The fortune he kept hidden from everyone. The fortune I found documentation of the night he died. Jackson stared at her in shock. Was this true, or a desperate, brilliant bluff? If such a fortune existed, why are you living in this wilderness? Mercer asked, skeptical. Because accessing it requires certain arrangements, she explained smoothly. Arrangements I couldn't make while being hunted. You tell me who is still paying for my capture, and I'll give you the location of documents proving the existence of $50,000. The amount hung in the air, a shimmering temptation. Mercer's greed was palpable. Robert Morgan's brother James hired us, he said finally. Now, you're part of the bargain. In St. Louis, Abigail began, there is a law firm, Donovan and Associates. In their vault is a sealed envelope containing documents detailing accounts totaling over $50,000. There is a clerk there named Thomas Wilson. Tell him Abigail sent you with the phrase, "The ledger balances at last." He will understand. The specificity of her lie, if it was a lie, was staggering. "And if this is all a fabrication?" Mercer asked, his hand drifting to his pistol. "Then you'll know where to find me," she said simply. "I'm not running anymore. I've found a place worth staying for." Her hand found Jackson's, a silent declaration. Mercer studied them for a long, tense moment. "I'll look into your claim," he said finally. "If it proves true, our business is concluded. If not—" He wheeled his horse around. "Until then, Mrs. Morgan, consider yourself on borrowed time." As the bounty hunters retreated down the trail, Wheeler emerged from the barn. "Well played," he said, shaking his head in admiration. "Is there really a fortune?" "There's money," Abigail admitted, the tension finally leaving her. "Not 50,000, but enough that James would kill to keep it secret. Robert was embezzling from their shared business for years." She had bought them a month of borrowed time. After Wheeler left, promising to return, they stood on the porch, the morning sun warm on their faces. "I'm sorry for not telling you everything," she said. "We all have secrets," he replied. "I've hidden from my own past for 10 years. I'm in no position to judge." "What happens now?" she asked. "When Mercer returns?" "We'll face it when it comes," he said. "For now we have a month. A month to make this place as strong as it can be." He knew she wasn't just talking about the barn roof or the garden. She was talking about them. "Together then," he said. And for the first time in a decade, the word held no fear for him, only promise. The month passed in a blur of hard work and quiet joy. They repaired the barn roof, their hands often brushing, their laughter echoing in the crisp mountain air. They expanded the garden, coaxing life from the stubborn soil. In the evenings they talked, sharing stories, fears, and dreams. He told her more about Sarah and the children, the memories now bringing a sweet ache rather than a sharp pain. She told him about her life before Robert, a life of simple pleasures she hoped to find again. They became a team, a partnership forged in crisis and tempered by mutual respect. One night, a quiet understanding passed between them, and he moved his bedroll from its lonely spot by the fire to the bed behind the curtain. In each other's arms, they found a solace neither had thought possible. The day of reckoning arrived, clear and cool. They stood on the porch, Wheeler beside them, a silent guardian. They waited. Finally, a single rider appeared on the trail, but it wasn't Mercer. It was a young man in city clothes, looking out of place in the rugged wilderness. "Mrs. Abigail Morgan?" he called, dismounting awkwardly. "I am." "Thomas Wilson, from Donovan and Associates in St. Louis." Abigail's eyes widened. "The clerk? Where's Mercer?" "Mr. Mercer won't be coming, ma'am," the young lawyer said gravely. "He met with an unfortunate accident in a gambling establishment. Before his death, however, he did contact me with a most unusual message. Something about the ledger balancing at last." Jackson exchanged a look of stunned disbelief with Abigail. "There are matters regarding your late husband's estate," Wilson continued, pulling a document from his satchel. "This should explain everything." Jackson took the paper. "It's a death certificate," he said, his voice flat. "For James Morgan, dated 3 weeks ago." "Heart failure," Wilson explained. "Quite sudden. It also came to light that both brothers were involved in significant embezzlement. As his brother's widow and with no other living heirs, you are the legal inheritor of the entire Morgan estate. With a full governor's pardon, I might add." He produced another document. "Several household staff came forward after James's death, testifying to the abuse you suffered. The circumstances of your husband's death have been re-evaluated." "It's over?" Abigail whispered, her voice trembling. "Truly over?" "It is, Mrs. Morgan," Wilson assured her. "You are free to return to St. Louis and claim your inheritance. Or," he glanced around the homestead, You are free to stay here. Abigail turned to Jackson, her eyes asking a question that needed no words. He took her hand, his answer equally silent. Her future was her own to choose. She turned back to the lawyer. I will need time to review these papers. You are welcome to stay the night. As the lawyer was shown to the barn, they remained on the porch, the enormity of it all sinking in. You could go back, Jackson said quietly. Reclaim your life. Live comfortably. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. I already have, she said, gesturing to the mountains, to the cabin, to him. Everything that matters is right here. He pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed. Are you sure? The winters are harsh. The work never ends. She leaned back, amusement dancing in her eyes. And cities are crowded and false. I've had enough of that for one lifetime. Besides, her expression softened, I've grown rather fond of this mountain and its most stubborn inhabitant. Then we stay, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Together. The sun began to set, painting the peaks in shades of gold and rose. The shadows of the past, his grief and her fear, finally began to retreat. Before them stretched a future neither had dared to imagine. The mountain had taken everything from him once. Now, in its own way, it had given it all back. Not a replacement, but a second chance. A new family. The ledger balances at last, Abigail murmured. Jackson nodded, understanding completely. After years of loss and loneliness, the scales had finally tipped toward hope. If you enjoyed this story of survival and second chances, don't forget to like and subscribe.